Hello, I'm Kim McDevitt, Executive Director of Mental Health America of Lancaster County. Today on Mental Health Now, we need to talk about men's mental health. We have Joel Chandler here today with us. He is the fitness director of Your Life Gym. We have attorney William Zee, and he is the education attorney for Appel, Yost Zee. And we have Dr. Tracey Lavalias, the executive director of the Behavioral Health Service Line at Penn Medicine, Lancaster General. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So men's mental health has been a topic at Mental Health America for some time now. Men's suicide rates were rising prior to the pandemic. The first year of the pandemic, they actually decreased. And then in 2021, we saw the highest rates of suicide in 8 years. All this while women's mental health women's suicide is decreasing. What are some of the top societal pressures that face men today? And I'm going to ask each of you to answer that.
I'll start the conversation. I think that, being in the healthcare environment, COVID has played a significant role, particularly from just a men's health perspective. So we've seen an increase in that recently. We've also seen an increase in what many men deal with from a depressive perspective. They sometimes turn to substance abuse. In order to be able to treat substance abuse in many ways, there's a social component to that, meaning that they go to groups, they go to different types of therapy sessions, and COVID being as it is has sort of isolated us from our support system, some of our natural support systems. So I think that has contributed to the recent increase in opioid use amongst males within Lancaster County. So we're certainly focusing on trying to decrease that as much as possible, but I do think that has been a significant impact.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. How about you, Bill? What do you think are the pressures?
I would say in my profession in particular, I think the never-ending workday as an attorney and the billable hour, I think with technology is great in many ways and allows us to do some really wonderful things for clients, but there's a feeling that you're always on. I know that that's something I've, even in my life, had to balance, and trying to couple that with being a husband and a father, I think that can be really difficult. One of the other areas I see is the lack of ability for men to kind of get together and talk about those. I think there's some stigma there still, certainly, and those two things together, I think, make for a difficult work-life balance often.
Mm-hmm. And you find that men are working more because of the pandemic, because they are working from home?
I do. I think a lot of those, and some of the downtime that we used to build into our day in the car, or, I'm a big music guy, so being able to listen to some music during my commute or between meetings. But when you're home and home becomes the office, you blur those lines. It's difficult to shut that down, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. How about you, Joel?
I think, to piggyback off of what you both said, there's enormous pressure from the contrast between the force of what COVID did to society, the expectation for male behavior, which is provide and show up, and to not really have the space to do both adequately makes it very difficult. So that manifests itself with what men begin to internalize. We see that in the gym in some cases. We're not a place where we go poking, asking for people to share or anything. But when you train people, you get to know them and you start to hear some of the pressure that they're feeling. It comes out. You don't ask for it, but you hear about it. There's a lot expected of men that I think people don't realize is expected of men, and men think they can't crack.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think that's different from generations past?
To some degree, I don't think it's really going to change, because the male, as a creature, we might say, has some aspects of itself that will not change. But I think the form that shows up in society is going to have some sort of expression that does change over time. I don't think I don't think there's, unless we have like a matriarchal society structure, that we're going to see a whole lot of that shift tremendously. I think a lot of it's going to be the sort of, we expect to see men provide, lead, contribute, and be the emotional stability, the anchor, so to speak, in the family unit, for example, or in the friends group or something like that.
Interesting.
You know, if I can add on to that, it was I had an interesting analogy that I gave years ago. My mother passed away, and this is in Texas, and so I grew up in a very religious family, and went to the funeral and came out of the funeral. My cousin, he was bawling he's just bawling his eyes out, and the pastor went over and talked to him, and basically, hold yourself together, because you're a visible representation to the rest of our family, and if you sort of cry and shed those tears, I think those types of representations, I think, are very permeant in males. I know for me, I sort of internalized that you really have to stay strong, and you have to stay strong not only for yourself, but you have to stay strong for those around you, because if you crack, if you break, then others around you will break. And so there's an obligation, I think, that's felt for men to be strong for the family, not just for themselves. So I think, just to your point, I think that's sort of some of the ways it manifests, at least in my life.
That's interesting. So you don't think that will lessen? Do you think that will lessen?
I guess I'll come at it from a little bit of a different angle, and someone who is a leader and a manager in a business. And I think there's been a shift sort of with gender roles a little bit, and we see more women in the workplace. And I think it's also difficult for men sometimes to be able to throw off those maybe misconceptions about what it means to be a worker or a leader, and understand how you balance that when you're working with female employees. Because I think those expectations historically, to your point about how this has changed over time, have looked different, and being able to balance that, and in some ways I think that may put more stress, mental stress on males in the workplace, being able to make sure that I am throwing off some of those gender stereotypes, but at the same time navigating the workplace.
Yeah, the Me Too movement, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly, yes.
Yeah, and bringing up the Me Too movement, I'm sure there's a lot of pressure and stress on a male on what's appropriate interaction with females, and I imagine that's a stressor as well. One of the, at MHA, we're very challenged to find ways to support men because they struggle to recognize or ask for help, or to ask for the support that they need. Why do you think men are less likely to seek help? And you shared a little bit about that, but even with their spouse or their partner or with a sibling, they might be less apt to reach out for support.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about it earlier, and what I meant, if I was not clear earlier, was that men, particularly depression or have issues, they more internalize, and you see it more self-medication, and you see it more substance abuse. So even in the healthcare system, when we find a person that has overdosed in drug or alcohol, it may not be a drug and alcohol issue, it may be a manifestation of drug and alcohol. They hide masking depression or self-medicating because they, to what I spoke to earlier, don't necessarily feel comfortable feeling vulnerable, feeling not strong. I think society, as was spoken about earlier, certainly doesn't support a man being vulnerable. I mean, even from advertisements and just from everything that you see, you internalize as a young child. So that stays with you. And so some of this is unconscious, and I don't think it is as conscious as we make it. I think we have made strides in that, reducing stigma. Your program is a prime example of that, but I think we have ways to go.
So each of you were invited here today because of the work you're doing in mental health. And what I'd like to hear more about is the change that, how you're changing the conversation and creating change within your community. So Mr. Zee, you're passionate about mental health trauma-informed care, and particularly with advocacy and legal work that you do in schools. Do you see a need for more mental health support for young males in schools? And can you share a little more about that?
Sure, I most certainly do. Part of the reason why I'm so involved in that work is because it's personal to me. I've experienced some of my own trauma, and processing through that, particularly in education, teachers were very important to me as an anchor and being able to be successful. And one of the reasons I really wanted to get involved in advocacy work with educators around this is seeing so many, as an education attorney, so many young men who are being suspended, expelled from school. We have a problem with the school to prison pipeline. A lot of that is connected to trauma and not having the ability to have those supports in the home. The next logical place often to look is the school.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your work in the schools
Yeah,
and your
absolutely.
advocacy for young men and students. Joel, you helped Jake of the band August Burns Red launch Our Life Gym, the world's first mental health gym, I understand, right?
As far as we know.
Can you share the mission of the gym and how what you're doing what you are doing to take down barriers for men?
Yes. To sum it up in one distilled sentence, our mission is to provide a soil environment for people to cultivate personal growth. So we wanted to put the mental health together with physical, not just for the physiological reasons that we all understand, like exercise is good for you, does a lot of things for the brain, but we also wanted to invite people openly with an invitation to self-awareness, to understanding mindset. You can't mix that in a shake and drink it. It takes investment in people, allowing them opportunities to explore the thoughts they're having in a moment, and fitness is the instrument that we use to help them explore that. If I can give you a task and start to help you dismantle a very clear self-limiting belief about the physical task, and then show you opportunities where that thing you just did can be applied to other places in your life, then you start to understand how the way that you frame something you think you can or can't do becomes something that is learnable.
Great. That's fascinating. So when we return, we will speak to Dr. Lavalias about his impact on mental health in our community. Hello, welcome back to Mental Health Now. My name is Kim McDevitt. I am the Executive Director of Mental Health America of Lancaster County. Today we're talking about men's mental health. We have with us Dr. Lavalias, Mr. William Zee, and Mr. Joel Chandler. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before the break, we talked about the impacts that you're making on men's mental health. So Dr. Lavalias, you are the Executive Director of Behavioral Health Service Line at Penn Medicine Lancaster General Health. What would you say the prominent barriers are in treating men, and what are you doing to change that?
I think we talked a little bit about it earlier. I do think that stigma, perceptions, societal perceptions, have really caused men to forego treatment. And we see that in a variety of other health conditions, high blood pressure and the like. I think it is incumbent upon us to empower caregivers. Men have been more likely to listen to people who they love, wives, children, the same way that they have take your dad to appointment day and things of that nature. I think we have to start doing some more quality initiatives. I spoke a little bit earlier about the self-sacrifice that many men make on behalf of their family. I think we can engage family members more. I think that we can reduce the barriers to having them seek treatment and letting them know that it's okay to feel vulnerable. And I think that's going to have to be done by family members, caregivers, in society alike. I think we've done a really good job just in making awareness present in our community. I think for any behavior change, I think awareness is a first step in that, and I think we've begun to make individuals aware that you can seek help and you can receive treatment.
That's great. I know at Mental Health America we're doing education in schools, in middle schools and high schools. And again, that early intervention, that education piece is essential to changing the culture, right?
Absolutely.
And Dr. Lavalias, we've seen an increase in reported suicides and mental health illnesses for Black and Hispanic males.
Yeah.
What do you think are the barriers for this demographic in getting support?
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. I think the African American community is about 4% in Lancaster County. Hispanic community is about 10%. The opioid deaths are 9%. And 14% respectively. So it's a disproportionate amount of deaths. One of the things that we're trying to focus on, there's also, unfortunately, a concentration of minorities in our local county prison. And we found that medically assisted treatment helps for those individuals that are experiencing substance use disorder to the extent that we can influence the prison system to initiate treatment so that these individuals can get the support even in the prison. So after they come out, they'll can continue to receive treatment. We think that we can impact the death rate because it has been increasing lately. So that's one of the major initiatives. Dr. Lepke, our addictions medicine medical director, is heading up that initiative now. So.
And there's a lot of work in mental health with the Reentry Coalition, so really helping through that continuum of care for people that are discharged or released from prison.
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Zee, the issue of men's mental health and stigma surrounding seeking care has always been a barrier. I believe we have a responsibility to change that, and you spoke a little bit about how that change can happen, but share a little more about how we can move it in the right direction.
Sure. Perhaps it's a bit of my special education background working with students, but I think people first language, for one thing, not identifying an individual based on an illness, including a mental health based illness, I think is really important. Again, as an employer, I try to incorporate as part of our mentoring, as part of our discussions amongst teams within our firm. We have check-ins weekly at our meetings. We talk about how people are doing, and we don't always get so caught up in the work. The work is going to be there, the work is going to get done, but if the team is not healthy, we're not good for ourselves, we're not good for our clients. So I think that's a big part of it, really addressing the stigma to the way we talk about things. You know, all of us at times have fall into the easy, that's going to give me PTSD, or that person's bipolar, and it's insensitive language. So I think trying to shift that will go a long way and allowing employers in particular to support their employees.
Well, that's interesting because mental health in the workplace, or supporting mental health in the workplace, is one of the initiatives we want to drive in 2022 and 2023. And, I attended one of your book clubs where you shared what the culture, changing the culture and what that looks like. So I think once we normalize the conversation, I think people will feel more comfortable asking for support because they're going to see mental health in the same way they see physical health.
Sure.
And that's what we're all aiming for.
Vulnerability is key. I think being able to discuss that with others in the workplace and move away from shame related to mental health, I think is really important.
That's great. And, men present differently than women, so they differ from women in their presentation of symptoms. Dr. Lavalias, can you share with us some of the symptoms or some of the signs when a man is struggling?
Isolation has been seen to certainly play its way out. It's interesting the lethality of the suicide that's present. I mean, obviously, gun violence by gun is the highest, as opposed to women who take by pills, overdose by pills. So the isolation and lethality of the situation has really caused some men to sort of internalize, and so you see when you see men start to pull away, the other signs are, particularly from a suicide perspective, are giving away items that are extremely personal, and so those are just some signs that we try to have family members focus on, and we try to provide them with support, such as mental health mental health first aid, being an opportunity to sort of educate the family members around them so that they can identify the signs, because in many cases, these men aren't going to reach out for help or support. But isolation, moving away, giving away things that are extremely personal to you are some significant signs.
And aggression, would you say aggression? And
It
anger?
manifests itself in a variety of ways. The go-to, as I stated earlier, is substance abuse. So those issues of self-medication, be either through alcohol or through and because of the alcohol or the drugs, there could be some violent tendencies based upon the substance. And so it's really boiled down to sort of self-medication and isolation.
So when do you know when you should be seeking help?
Well, I think for the individual, if you sort of examine the psyche, I don't think that it's really apparent in the individual, which is why I try to talk about the family members outside of them, individuals who can recognize that there's a significant change in behavior and work with that person to get support. There's a variety of ways that we talk about doing intervention, sitting a person down, so that with people they love and care about, so that they can help them get into treatment. Unfortunately, the laws that we have in Pennsylvania doesn't support involuntarily committing a person that has substance use. You can involuntarily commit a person that has a mental health issue because they might be in danger to themselves or others, but not from a substance use disorder. And so unfortunately, the mental health manifests through the substance use disorder. You can't involuntarily commit from the substance use, so it puts us at a bit of a quandary in the sense of getting them help and support.
Yeah, and I think the idea behind the gym is to be able to reach people organically and open up that conversation. You shared a little bit about that earlier. But how can we approach the conversation with a loved one when they suspect, you mentioned, identifying someone who's struggling, and it might be a partner that identifies that, or a friend, a brother, a parent.
Sure. One of the things that we wanted to do at the gym was figure out how to address the question without framing the question as already charged. So how do you remove the charge from the stigma? And one of the ways we did that was this open door concept, where we have our mental health discussion groups. People learn about resilience, stress management, which is critically important for your exercise program, but they didn't have to come knocking. It's not mandatory that you come do so. Come learn more about what it means to be a human being. And it's as easy as asking someone, how are you doing? Because it begins there. We mind the whole scope of practice barriers. There are things we can't do. I'm a fitness trainer and coach. Been doing this for 11 years, but I can't do what licensed professionals can do. So my job is to see if someone's having a hard time, then I can refer them to the right resources. But I can't poke, I can't prod, I can invite them to discuss their humanness, and that's what we do there. I think that's without framing it as, hey, here's a place where you're going to be stigmatized. There's a white coat in the back room here. How do we get rid of that completely? And that's how we did it. That's
a wonderful concept. Thank you. Thank you. So this was a great conversation. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this story this conversation, that we are trying to reach men. How do we reach men? And so we continue to have this conversation to normalize mental health. Do you have any concluding thoughts about men's mental health?
I think that you talked a little bit earlier about getting to a point where we talk about mental health just in general in the same way that you talk about cancer. It's easier to say I have cancer than it is to say I have it, unfortunately, in society. So it's even that much more difficult for men. So, I aspire to be at a place in the future that we can talk about these issues. And this is a major step forward. So I appreciate you for having me here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we should champion people that have platforms to be able to discuss these things in a way that takes away that stigma. We focus a lot, particularly in the professions, on, getting out there and promoting what we do. And I think that if you have the opportunity to get in front of people and talk about, particularly as men, because I think many, many men are impacted at some point in their lives with mental health struggles. Absolutely. I think that's really, so I would really encourage people to do that, to kind of take that leap and and get involved that way.
Great. Champions. We need more champions.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's a cultural puzzle, isn't it? How do we change the conversation? It's people's understandings of what mental health issues are, what it looks like when you try to address them, but it's also the education piece, and everything that you both do is critically important to everything that we're trying to do all together. So it may be worth noting here that in the discussion groups that we have, we first anticipated there would be more women that participate. What we have found is that there are more men participating than women. So a little N of one study in our own gym, but nonetheless very encouraging to see.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today on Mental Health Now.
Thank you.
Thank you.